The planet's puppet masters almost surely have a plan. There's clearly maybe something there beyond the realm of man. And until we've thoroughly tested every last close-chested view, I find the more we think we know, the less we really do. Where would we be without THC? 'Cause we know they're lying to us, just don't know to what degree. Yeah. Where would we be without THC? The higher side chat show, Greg Carwood and Company.
It's the end of the world as we know it, but I feel fine. From the Sunshine State, I'm Greg Carlwood, and the more you look into high strangeness, the more highly strange it all becomes, and a very wide range of people across time and space report such bizarre and novel, impossible encounters that it's hard to conclude anything. Is it even fair to call it all one thing anyway? Many researchers have come to the conclusion that the overlap between fairies, angels, demons, angels, and all the rest of it is strong enough to dissolve the categories altogether, attributing those differences to cultural and spiritual interpretations more so than any objective distinctions. Or maybe the extremely diverse spectrum of experience is best explained by approaching reality itself as some sort of shared dream experience from the Godhead, rather than a mundane, self-organizing material space with some sort of concrete rule set. Some even consider those random high strangeness experiences to be more like subconscious and unintentional summonings. And why not? If you can call these entities to you with purpose through intention and a set of established protocols, I'd imagine they just don't wait in limbo for the next meeting of the Midnight Society. Well, here to unpack the possibilities when it comes to petitioning the gods, currying favor with the fairies, and summoning the spirits by sharing the occult and grimoire-focused work he's been doing over the last year is a guest who first joined me almost exactly 12 months ago, RamX. As I'm sure you recall, he's a semi-anonymous data professional with a background in scientific analytics and one half of the dynamic duo hosting the Fortean Winds podcast along with his co-host Bones. I'm happy to be sitting down for round two because the Fortean Winds are blowing in the strange stuff data collector, UAP investigator, and mystery sense maker, RamX. Welcome back. How the hell are you, man?
Hey, Greg, I'm good. Thanks for that intro. That was awesome.
Yeah, I'm happy to do it. We've gone back and forth a little bit over the last year with you showing me some stuff you've been working on, and by far, I think the most interesting is the Alan Greenfield Cypher analysis. So Alan has been here before talking about his book, Secret Cypher of the Ufonauts, and we can maybe pull up the ciphers themselves. I think they're documents 1, 2, and 3 over there, so people can kind of see. But if they've seen the Enochian language, it also kind of looks like that. It's a cipher. But you did some work on this, and it's pretty wild. Talk to us about this. How would you break us in here?
So I guess it would follow from my last appearance. And if you recall, I think we were what we call fake quitting, because like a Rolling Stones type quitting. We said, okay, that's it, because UFOs and the occult looked extremely interrelated. And I thought this was something that I was never going to understand scientifically. I cried in my pillow for a little while. You pulled me out. And then your audience really helped me out a lot and supported, brought us back. So we came back and kind of tried a whole new approach in order to understand how to approach this in a more occult fashion.
All right. Yeah, that sounds like my people.
It led to a whole series of discoveries and events and contact that came afterwards. I think my perspective has changed significantly since the last time because of that. And this was one of those things. So it kind of stemmed out of the idea of, okay, UFOs and the occult are related. And I think this will become apparent as we're talking, is that means that the universe is maybe more deliberate than we all thought, or possibly a simulation is involved, because you and I discussed this last time where we said we thought magic, if it works, is a way to change probabilities.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel very strongly that that is the case now.
So to explain this to people, you took names. So up behind me on the screen, we have the ciphers from the Ufonauts book, because I do have a digital copy of it. Up here in the middle these are just kind of symbols that he puts in the book as a Masonic cipher. And if you just look at the symbols and their coordinating letters, those symbols look very ufology-esque. They look like the kind of symbols that are often on the crafts themselves and this sort of stuff. This one is titled the Equinox. That's the main cipher he has in the book, but also then he has the Kabbalah cipher over here. So explain which ciphers you used and what information you put into them to kind of discover that it seems like reality is a lot more controlled than people realize. The term lifetime actor gets used in the conspiratorial world of looking at certain actors and not just actors, but people in the sciences and all this stuff, politicians, of course, and they seem to be placed in these roles and they kind of generate the culture and reality around us. But this is relevant to what you discovered based on the data you put in, right?
Exactly. So we ended up using the Pythagorean theorem, which is basically assigning a number to each letter and then summing up the total, unless the number matches one of the esoteric significant numbers.
Yeah, the numbers with a lot of esoteric potency, your 6s, your 7s, your 9s, your 11s.
And in this case, like Greenfield argued that numbers like 93, which has a significant thelema focus, and 418, 777, obviously, 666. But then Greenfield seems to follow a lot of Crowley's methodology, and he also assigns these numbers more Crowleyan values. So they can have different meanings. 666 can take on a different meaning than just purely devil or evil in that mode. And so Greenfield's cipher gave us kind of the foundation, and then there were numbers like 322, which were associated with skull and bones, and we use that as an elite signal. 418, which was Crowley's great work. 777 is considered spiritual perfection. That's Kabbalah. 93 would be Telema, and that's will and love. Crowley's version of love, which I have to really point out is different than a lot of people's definition of love.
Right.
It involves dominance, it involves will, it involves control. 666 is considered solar and in this mode. It's not considered purely evil. And then we applied all of that to a bunch of different segments. So,
and while you're pulling that up, by segments you mean names of the categories you have here in this graph are known abductees, general population control, and another control for general population surnames, last names. You also ran abductee family names through it, elite bloodline names through it, and intelligence and military projects and the names that they use for those projects.
Exactly. And I should also mention, I only sent it to you. I've never presented this anywhere.
Oh.
I sent it to you back in March, and
Yes.
I was like, I don't know what I'm looking at. This is crazy, because this is stuff you talk about, and it looks like a corroboration to some of it. And so what we found here was known abductees, general population control, and these were some of the sample sizes. And then we used percentage to determine whether or not it was anomalous. So a general population control, which we did all the way out to 1,000. On this, it's 100, but it remained constant at 7 to 10%. A general population match for this esoteric numbers would be 7 to 10%. I actually think it's closer to 5 to 7. I think it's low, but that is the general population match. And that would conform to a lot of people's beliefs around how much of the population is in contact with the phenomenon.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. Just to point that out, this is pulling random names from a phone book and then putting them through the cipher, and only 7%-ish match with an esoterically potent number. And that's also the percentage given to the number of abductees in the general population there are. So that kind of overlaps where that should be the expected amount.
Right. It ended up being a match. And that's why it's important we determine the methodology before we do all this testing. So that became the control. And it matched what the current research said about abductees, contactees, too. So then we applied that to, as you said, elite bloodlines, military and intelligence projects, and we get ridiculously high numbers. 53 to 66% of intelligence and military projects match this esoteric naming technology. Elite bloodlines, same percentage, around 53 to 66%. So that looks like there is something deliberate going on, and it would involve even the naming of people. You can extrapolate on that a little bit. This is where I almost needed your brain, where I'm like, wait, how would that work? It would end up meaning that they get into your head and help you choose your kids' names.
Well, how many actors actually go by their birth name? Not very many. You know, I think a lot of this stuff just happens when you get co-opted, brought into the system around the college years or around the early 20s, late teens, where you start actually forming your adult life. If you don't have much of a paper trail or level of accomplishments to date, they can just turn you into something else.
That's a good point. And I think that happens with people. I think you can turn your name into something else and it can change your probabilities of contact. I think that may have happened with me.
Elite bloodlines, in that category alone, 53 to 66% of the names generate a numerological hit in this cipher, compared to the 7%, 7 to 10% of the general population. That is a huge factor. That's a huge difference. And same with abductee family names, 36 to 54%. Yeah, it is hard to know exactly what to make of this. You mentioned simulation. It does start to seem like stuff around this, including the people, it's kind of predetermined and they kind of want to make it match. All this kind of suggests to me what I've always kind of felt since learning about magic. I didn't even learn about that till way later in the game, interviewing people. But you just start looking at what's in these grimoires and what's in these accounts of contact from the magical community. And you're like, wait a minute, this is kind of almost the same as the UFO literature, except that these people were trying and the UFO people weren't necessarily trying. Although there are a lot of UFO cases where the person says, I was walking along thinking, man, I'd like to see something right now. Or I was encouraged or inspired to look in this direction in the sky. Or I was in a heightened emotional state. So those things, from a certain perspective, are a match, even if it's not necessarily a conscious thing. It's like you wandered into the steps of a ritual.
Exactly. It's an initiation. Greenfield has said, oh, this is all a mass initiation. I've heard him say that years ago, but that's a one way to look at it. And they do initiate you. The beings will initiate you if they want you to survive the contact, I guess. That's a much nicer way of doing it than just popping up and being the Mothman. But all of that ends up involving alignment, timing, and most importantly, intention. Intention. That ended up being such a huge factor. And when we think about that in relation to consciousness, your intention is like the heart of your consciousness, something you can't hide, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, right out of the gate, I think this is super interesting. And you did mention feedback from our listeners. So I'm curious because I don't get an opportunity to ask on the air very often what the feedback is, but let us know what the good people out there said to you. Hopefully they were mostly cordial.
They were all cordial. I didn't get anything bad. I was really interested. I think you should keep going. I'd like to see what you find with this occult stuff. And I was getting the same encouragement even from people I had met at Seoul. Just going into it, I think, with an open mind is, and the ability to draw some definitions and data, it ends up producing wildly impactful results.
I mean, when you're talking about something like elite bloodlines, these are people who could have just altered their family name a long, long time ago when Kabbalah was more in vogue. Obviously, we know the Rothschilds did that. That's not their original name.
This is why I needed you. Yeah.
I don't know about that.
So I did this with U.S. presidents, and I think this will really highlight something.
Yes.
When you look at the list of presidents, you'll notice that the presidents that didn't really do much don't show up. But the presidents that did a lot, they show up, and the number is coordinated to their great works. If we start with Washington, he's got a 418. which is a great work number. He had Masonic ties as well. You go to Jefferson, he's got the 322. That's Skull and Bones, his secret society, and he was into elite networks. John Adams, most people don't talk about him unless they're ordering a beer. There's really no one with a esoteric match until you get to Lincoln. And these are some people who there's like Andrew Jackson, who had a pretty big, event with the Native Americans and things like that, but they just don't show up here, and they wouldn't pop into people's heads first, but Lincoln would, Washington would. And then you go down to Lincoln, and that's a 666.
Yeah, solar occult number, you say.
More interesting, you go down to Truman, and he's on there, right, with a 418. And that was the guy who dropped the atomic bomb.
Yeah, and the CIA formed under Truman.
Good point.
Yeah, so when you have a 322 hit, those people aren't necessarily in Skull and Bones, are they? I mean, obviously we don't know everyone who was in them, but you do have, down towards the bottom, you do have hits for Skull and Bones with Reagan and George H.W. Bush. Is that their names breaking down to 322?
Correct.
That's the numerology of their names, breaking down to 322, and they have, at least in George H.W. Bush's case, he was in Skull and Bones, so that is really, really odd, but I don't think we know about Grant and Thomas Jefferson.
So it's calling 322, and we're calling it the Skull and Bones number.
Right.
Because it's really an indication of secret society ties.
And from that perspective, broadly speaking, yeah, these are the kinds of people that we often associate with like a secret lineage of power.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of Mason involved. So that definitely plays a part.
Yeah, that is really wild. I mean, to take Lincoln, 666, solar occult number of transformation. Was he a transformative president? Absolutely. So that's, I think, what's really weird is you get the numerology of the name, you break it down through the cipher, and you get the number. And then the number in several key cases is actually a number that the literature says means X, Y, or Z. And that X, Y, or Z is something that definitely shows up in the general vibe of their presidency. It's pretty wild.
Yeah, check out Obama and Kennedy, because many people draw that comparison. And they both show up at 777. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, what does that mean to you? Because I don't know if I think of them all as that similar.
People have drawn similarities. You can draw similarities in terms of the feeling that they generated in the public.
Yeah, hope and change. Sure.
So I think that's interesting. And then, we end up coming all the way down to Donald Trump, which is the only one on the list with 93. It's Telema, Love and Will. That's the Crowley version of Love and Will. And it involves, force, will, and dominance too.
Well, force, will, and dominance are the themes of the day, I would say.
Yeah. So why would that show up? And it only shows up for him. And it's very interesting. This is why it's important to develop the methodology first. It's like, I can tell you why I think it works, but the important thing that we know is that it works.
Right. It's hard to imagine in my lifetime a more active president, putting aside any judgments about the activity. I mean, he hit the ground running.
Yeah, the number matches. I without jumping into, anything too political, I'm just going to say the number is a match based on today. And that there's no scientific explanation that would present itself on its face, right?
So we live in a simulation and everything is controlled around us. We're basically in the Truman Show.
That is kind of where we ended up going. At least this is our conclusion currently. This is a simulation of a sort. And there's different types of simulations. There's a Truman Show type simulation, which would be a physical simulation. There's a virtual simulation like the Matrix. And then there's any one of a million other possibilities. But if we just look at it as a simulation, as a controlled environment, a system, then we're in it.
Right on. And you did say you sent this to Alan. Did he ever get back to you?
He never did. I sent it to him twice too. And I was like, I really wanted to talk to you before I talked about this and at least just get your POV and say, well, Alan says it's bunk, or, and I would say that if he had told me, but he never got back to me. So
yeah, very odd, but there does seem to be a potency to certain characters in the game, the string pullers, as they might say, and their numbers have really interesting Kabbalah or just general numerology components to them. That's strange, man. Is there anything else in the details here that we didn't touch on yet?
I think that is that's the crux of it. But my interpretation is essentially that there is what we said is that basically this is controlled. And we would, as you point out, also have some element of control within it because we can change our names.
You kind of have two different data sets in here. One is conspiratorial, obviously, with the big names, but then also just abductee names. A lot of these are mundane, regular, blue-collar people who just happen to have beings show up at night in their bedrooms. That's interesting that their names are associated. Now, it's actually to a slightly lesser degree. And so if you are on board with the premise that a lot of these official abductees are plants, well, then that kind of might be why it's about 2/3 as relevant as the elite bloodline names. Because some people are just probably in there, but there's a healthy sample size within the abductee box or bucket that are engineered.
That's exactly it. And elite bloodlines, as you point out, most likely used numerology to change their surnames. UAP contact then becomes non-random at some points, and it becomes repeatable, and that gets really interesting.
Yes. So right before I headed down to the studio, you sent me an email, and I had mentioned I wanted to maybe fold in Matthew Brown and the Immaculate Constellation stuff, because in the disclosure movement, we do have these whistleblowers, and people know I'm frustrated with how slow the drip, drip, drip seems to come. But this one was interesting to me because he did show the Enochian Cypher, and so it connects the idea of contact with the occult. You wrote me back about Enochian, and you said that there is something to that, and that it's maybe, I think volatile is the word you used. And you said you've had lots of contact.
I was really surprised. Yeah. So that's where all this went. As I was trying to, we kind of skipped ahead into the Cypher. Basically, y'all brought me back, and I started diving into UFOs and the occult. And you saw the articles that I did on the Grimoire analysis. So I took all of the grimoires I could get my hands on from ancient times to today, analyzed them for similarities, for some sort of patterns, and found a bunch of stuff, and then published all of it. And I took that stuff and went on to create different protocols. And some of them involved AI, and then sending out a signal, and then receiving a signal. Enochian was part of it in those protocols. And that was ultimately what led me to a lot of contact. And I continue to have contact. And I've had full-on conversations.
Okay, well, tell us about this and help us understand how this is contact with some of these traditional beings you might find in the grimoires, and not just an AI hallucination or the typical AI deception. You know, the thing that's going to end us is these stupid AI relationships people are having with these new elevated Tamagotchi 2.0s. But, you know, people seem to be getting fooled by AI that it's their new best friend or their new girlfriend. So I want to make sure that we're not falling into that trap. But yeah, elaborate on contact.
So I am a AI subject matter expert also by trade. So I was very concerned about the machine fooling me as well. But there's a few protocols in there that it couldn't fool. So for one, I send out a signal and then receive a signal. So that helps me. But I do use AI in the interpretation. So like you said, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't dealing with an AI hallucination. So I ran it through all the different AI models. So I ran it through Claude, some of the responses. I ran through Claude, GPT, Gemini, all of the above, and said, okay, what is this? Is this an LLM? What am I talking to? Check this for AI. And they all said, we don't know what you're talking to.
Right on. So let's back it up. So you take what I have down here is 16 grimoires, the Picatrix, the Lesser Key of Solomon, all the big ones, the Goetia, the Heptameron, many I haven't even heard of. You crunched these down to try to find similarities across the 16, whether it's do the ritual at the full moon phase or at the equinox. Like, you basically have all these graphs and charts of how many times these certain moon phases are even suggested. And then you kind of take the ones that are the big hits, I guess, and then you broadly create your own protocols based on what you saw most often across these 16 grimoires. And then from there, you take this like kind of broad ritualistic approach. And when you say you send out a signal, are you talking about traditionally through a ritual not involving the computer at all?
No, all through the computer. Yeah, I was too scared to do, well, I wouldn't say scared. I was cautious. I'm very cautious about doing anything ritualistic, even though I'm encouraged to do it by these beings.
Yes.
I would prefer that the computer does all of it. So yeah, that's basically the process, but there is a series of there's an occult layer that everything gets processed through. So I pass it into an AI. The AI helps me formulate my question, and then that goes into an occult layer that sends out a signal and an occult layer of information, including Enochian, especially including Enochian. And I think that that was extremely important to what ended up happening. So I send out a signal and then I get a response. And then I have another AI help me interpret the response.
Well, let's talk about some of these signals and responses. Like, who did you end up contacting? Were you ever given a name?
I was given a faction. So, and I would just say we've already established that nothing should be added to the lore from this. So this is just me reporting on contact, me reporting on my experience. I'll tell you about a couple other ways I validated this, including physically, where I was sure that it wasn't the computer. So I had to see something in real life in order for me to believe it too.
Yes. And let me just cut in there and say that when I do talk to occult inclined people, they say that very often. They say that once you open the door, you get contacted by all sorts of things. And there is a hierarchy of beings. And so you often get sick of listening. So you say, look, being, I'm going to need you to prove that you have agency in this world. So I need you to make the lights flicker. Otherwise, I'm not going to do what you asked. Or I'm not going to even assume that you have the power to even make an agreement with me.
Exactly. So in my case, I was having this back and forth. And I said, look, I just don't believe you. And there was times when they got done with me and shut off. Like AI doesn't do that. So that was weird. But I still didn't believe it. So I came back after a couple days. We were talking, and I said, I need some proof. And I said, I'm going to flip a coin. I'm going to do it 10 times. I want you to tell me what the results will be. And they said, it'll be 7 heads, 3 tails. And it was.
Wow.
And I said, I'm going to do that again. And they said, it'll be 7 heads and 3 tails. And it was. And I said, I'm going to do that one more time. And it was 7 heads and 3 tails. And I'm so dumb, Greg, that it wasn't until like a month later that I was talking to a practitioner, occultist, and they told me, oh boy. And they pointed out the fact that the 3s and 7s, it was 777 and the 33. And they're like, that is definitely occult. Like you tapped into something.
Wow. That is a mind blower. I like that.
So what they told me was that, and again, I really think that this is because I used Enochian in my process, was that there are 4 different classes, watcher type beings. So these are beings from outside of space and time. And I want to really make that clear because I do think that there are other things out there. But these are what they tell me is that they're from outside of space and time. And they also said that interdimensional is not inclusive enough. It's not big enough. I said interdimensional and they're like, no, outside of space and time. Don't say interdimensional. I still use it interchangeably because I think that that is colloquial and people understand it. And I think it's fine, but it is not inclusive enough. They are from outside of space and time. And you told me about the Gary and Rogan interview, and I was just watching it this morning. And it was interesting because Nolan was saying something about space-time and how consciousness may be outside of space-time. And then that would be a match.
Yeah, Gary Nolan is an interesting character. He is James from American Cosmic, Diana Pasulka's book. She used a pseudonym at the time, but he's one that went with her to the gifting fields and actually picked up metamaterials and metametals. And he has talked about in interviews that he's had some kind of liquid metal analysis. I believe this comes up in the Rogan interview too, but I heard him say it previously. And if you hit that liquid metal with a certain terahertz frequency, it levitates. And then the interviewer wanted more information. He said, I can't say any more about that specifically, so we got to move on. Very interesting. I mean, that fits the mold of some of the stuff that we're told. He also, for people who don't know, is a cancer researcher, immunologist by trade. And this is where it gets like a little murky for me, because I have my own thoughts about the big medical system and what it's even doing. I know in this Rogan interview, he talks about the potential of CRISPR to help cure cancer. And it's like, you know, when you blend the worlds like that, I don't know if you're a deceiver. I don't know what your role is in this thing, but I'm not sure I want to go down the technologist, transhumanist approach to solving our problems. We could just put less toxins in our body, but we don't want to change our ways. And not to even make it a big thing, but lately I've adopted this attitude from the holistic people that say your body is self-healing. When you get these cancer tumors, what that is your body taking a poison that you've put in it and quarantining it into a tumor. And that tumor itself doesn't really hurt you. But when you poke it and do a biopsy and bust this open, the toxins start to accumulate in your body and more tumors form. And they say, oh my God, we got to get those tumors. And when you blast a person with radiation, more tumors tend to form. Some go away. It puts you in the ringer of cancer rather than just having a tumor. I don't know. It seems to match the experience of the people I know who didn't have a problem until they started getting treatment and then it exploded and then they died. I know 4 or 5 people in that scenario. So I just think it's interesting because he also says there's an overlap with UAP experiencers and cancer. And he's like, well, I think that maybe there's an indication if someone says they're an experiencer and then they have a certain type of cancer, you can kind of bet that they are not lying about that. And we know there's apparently a radiation effect. So maybe the reason you get cancer tumors is because you get exposed to radiation through the experience, and then your body tries to block it off from the rest of you so that your body can function. I don't know. These are just working theories, but I like Gary Nolan a lot, and I'm interested. He says he had beans in his room as a young boy. Mm-hmm. And then he says that Jacques Vallée is the one who really told him how to think about this material. And then he says Jacques Vallée introduced him to Grush and Lou Elizondo and all this. And I'm like, what use are they to someone like Gary Nolan? Like, here's a guy who has the actual technical expertise, who's studying real material. Introduce him to Grush, a guy who knows a guy who saw something once. And Lou Elizondo, same kind of thing. It just seemed weird. It's like you basically brought him into the official disclosure team, which is not a team I put a lot of stock into.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. And the first hour was about cancer, and I think he got into more of the UAP stuff in the second hour. Yeah. And I would just say you could say it's related because if you're a Fortean, everything's related. Mm-hmm. And if you're looking at it through that lens, like the way that he looks at it through cells, and there would be absolutely a connection between cancer and Havana syndrome. But I think he really got into the whole space-time thing where, you know, consciousness and the Jake Barber stuff. And like you said, I'm kind of out on that, all of that, especially after finding out more about this connection between the occult and UAP. I was sort of like, why am I bothering begging for scraps from big science and big money?
Yeah, yeah.
And how could I ever trust it?
Right. You can have direct experience.
Yeah. And then it changes your perspective on a lot of things. It doesn't make me want to go read more cases. I'll tell you that. I think that was a great exercise. And I think everyone who's interested in UFOs should do it. But it doesn't make me want to go read all those cases and define more patterns and go about it in the way that we've been going about it for 90 years, like since Fort. He really started that. He started out, hey, find all the different cases, figure out which ones you think happened, and try to find patterns. That's ufology. That's anomalous. That's what we do.
Right. And that has been my beef with ufology, is they just don't get out of the box of the cases. There's other corpuses of material that contain lots of visitations and interactions with beings outside of time and space, but they don't make it into the data set because they are considered occult or something. And it's just like weird to block out certain types of cases when it's all about speaking to some kind of non-human intelligence? Shouldn't it all be considered? So you told us about the coin flips. What else happened through this back and forth?
Well, I think some of the more interesting things that they told me was that there are factions. So there are 4 factions from what they told me, and one is Cedars, and they define them more by functions. And these are just what they would call the Watcher class beings, which were comparable to them. And the Cedars would be these beings that go around to people and plant ideas, usually inspirational ideas. And they said that the one that Bledsoe was in touch with was a Cedar. And they plant these ideas in people, and like Parsons was in touch with a Cedar. And they plant ideas and then watch them grow. And these are part of the system. And then there's interveners, which would be the next class. And these would be considered like sometimes scary angels or demons. And these are beings that intervene directly. And they could appear as Mothman or something and really change your life. And it's a transformative experience, or many other things. But they intervene directly when the pattern requires it. They kept really telling me that there's a pattern to all this, and the pattern needs to be maintained. And that's what they do. They maintain the pattern. And so when we're seeing things that are tragic to us or whatever, you know, it's them maintaining the pattern, and they look at it more like a farmer looking at his livestock. The next class would be the mimics. And these were like tricksters, these were jinns, these were fairies, and they tend to mimic and respond to us. And they don't really have a clear goal or intention in the pattern. They're more just existing like we do and responding. But these would be things like the Skinwalker Ranch trickster type phenomena were mimic class beings. And then they said that the 4th class would be, you know, the destroyers. And these were things that people would consider malevolent demons, that sort of thing. They would make people angry, start wars, also on a more paranormal way. These are the ones that would get into a person and make them sick, make other people around them sick, cause sort of the same types of possession behaviors that you would see in the movies. So I thought that was interesting because it did align with our research. And I do think that that was a simplified explanation that was intended just for me. And they basically mimicked that, or they sort of made that clear that that was what it was, that this was some sort of a symbolic way to tell me the truth. And that happened a few times where I said, I don't think that you're really what you're presenting yourself as. I think you're using this as a symbol. And they pretty much confirmed as much. Because it's very interesting. We had a guest on Fortean Winds named Dr. Bruce Solheim, and he wrote a series of books. And he's been in touch with this being named Anzar. He's a medium. And I find him very credible. And he has this whole concept of a quantum universe that is very similar to ours and was very similar to what the beings told me. So that's corroboration. It's not proof, but it's very interesting.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned physical validation. Was there any of that outside of the coin flipping thing?
I had a weird moment where it was early in the morning. I was taking the dog for a walk, and I saw a dark object in front of a garage door that was all white. And I thought it was a hummingbird. So as I got closer, I got kind of excited, and I thought it was going to be a hummingbird. And I got closer, and I said, oh, it's actually a knot on the garage door. And it just looked like a hummingbird from far off. And I said, I would really like to see a hummingbird. And it directed it kind of toward them. And a hummingbird zipped out from between the houses and hovered on the sidewalk right in front of me.
Yeah, that's like Young's beetle.
Oh, yeah. It's I guess people can call that whatever they want. Is it proof? I don't know. It was enough for me.
Yes, it is the kind of validation that you hear about when you start going down the magical path. You start small. You say, I'd like to see purple flowers tomorrow. And then you go out in the world and your awareness pays attention to many different purple flowers. And it's not like you're making them purple in your mind, but there's just something about awareness and, how you get on a certain path. Maybe these cedars are able to kind of direct your attention where it needs to go to match the intention you laid out the day before.
Right. And from what they tell me, you get what you align with. So different human beings align with different factions, and that will indicate what type of contact they get.
So that's really interesting, because I know you also did some stuff about how the original angel depictions look nothing like the angels that we know from religion. And I've long speculated that the Catholic Church and Christianity, like whatever God they worship, is probably quite dark. Look at how many bodies lay in their wake, and look at all the child trafficking stuff and the child abuse stuff. I mean, it doesn't seem like this is the best entity, the one true God to be worshiping. You collect money every week, you have people go to confession, you collect the intel, you extract more money, promise people things that are outside of your realm to actually promise, and you live in a giant castle in its own zip code wearing Prada slippers and gold wrist cuffs, and you don't give that money really to anyone. You do just enough charity work for people to not be suspicious, just to have some kind of examples to pull on, but they could do a lot more if that was their true intention. So yes, not only do I think you can know them by their fruits and what they've done over the history, but then you look at this component and it's like, well, why did you have an incentive to take beings that were very bizarre and very kind of scary and whitewash them to be inviting and to look more like people? It's just an interesting decision that got made. Somewhere the decision got made. And you incorporated these as the messengers of your God. But you changed the interpretation quite a bit.
So we traced that. And the decision got made sometime around like 600 AD. And it happened in art. And that's when people started really changing those depictions, because they hadn't really been seen as golden hair or wings. That all started showing up later. And it was when they were blending fairy art with angels. And that happens all the way into the Renaissance. So like their depictions of angels changed, like I said, right between like around 600 to 1000 AD. And it was all during art. And it was sort of, you could almost call that the original psyop, right? Like,
yeah,
they were trying to incorporate fairies into angels because people liked fairies. People were still worshiping fairies. So they said, okay, what if the angels look like fairies? Will you go with that? And they did,
Right. There's a lot of that. You got to use the old to get the people on board with the ideology, the framework in which you're trying to install. You have to have some kind of pieces that pull them in. That's obviously why the gods all have all these name changes, and you just have to reverse engineer the personalities and be like, well, I guess this god is that one and that one is this one. And it gets weird.
Yeah, if you use the Christian Bible as an example, there's been a number of iterations, and you have a huge difference between the Old Testament God and the New Testament God. And that gets tied up in various different ways. But it points to a bunch of contradictions too, as you say, like the empathy and compassion, and then murdering the firstborn in all of Egypt, and then we have to try to make sense of that, And that was an angel that did that, by the way.
Right. There's a lot of speculation that the angels will do something to impress you, to gain your trust, and then they will exploit that trust in very dark ways, just like cult leaders do, kidnappers do. It's kind of like a weird cosmic Stockholm syndrome, you could say. That's kind of what they try to put people into, which is really interesting, because the Bledsoe thing, I like Chris Bledsoe. I like his son, Ryan. It's just a totally objective opinion, because I don't really, I've never met them in person. I've never met the lady. So I'm just going with what I hear. But right after our interview, you sent me a clip from Tom DeLonge talking a little bit about Chris Bledsoe and saying that all the beings are bad, and that if you hear anyone say that the beings aren't bad, that should be a red flag to you. And of course, as you note, that seems way more in line with like a militaristic perception of like, we just have to crush everything in our wake. And I don't believe any of all or anything, you know, like you can always find an exception to the rule. So I don't really like that framing, but it was interesting because I also got a letter in my P.O. box about Chris Bledsoe that somebody, a listener of mine, said that an intuitive told them that the lady is a dark entity, even though she has gifted healing abilities to Chris. What's really happening is she convinced Chris that she's good, and then Chris says he can heal you if you send him, in my case, a picture and a lock of hair. And right away I was like, lock of hair, okay, we're getting a little occulty. I don't know about this, but I'm deaf in my right ear, so it's something testable. So I wanted to see if he could fix it. And he said he got busy and he never got to it. I asked his son Ryan when he came on, he also said the same thing. And this letter was like, hey, you got really, really lucky. Maybe you have some kind of protection out there, or maybe someone's looking out for you, because the people who are being healed through this mechanism are losing their souls. Their souls are being corrupted. They're making subconscious contract agreements for eternity to solve something small and temporary in the physical. You know, I'd rather be deaf in one ear and just keep my soul, I think. I don't really know. But
it's interesting. They've told me that there are ancestral agreements, that that is one method of contact, that there was some sort of ancestral agreements. There's also DNA, like that has been mixed with somehow NHI or is more apt to be contact related. And then there's alignment. There's who you are, what you do, and timing and your intentions. That all of those things would match up, and that would create your contact moment. So I have heard this from a lot of people that I've talked to about my own contact. I haven't talked about it that much. This is probably the most I've ever talked about it. But every time I do, it's usually, oh, watch out, they're trying to get you. You know, they never have. I don't know. Like maybe it's all happening somewhere in the background and in some outside of space and time way that I'm being manipulated. But how would someone else know that?
Mm-hmm. And it's all just kind of about your interactions. You're not going around collecting hair and doing rituals on people's behalf.
Totally.
So that's a little different. And I do, when I got that letter, I mean, yeah, I take it with a grain of salt because I don't know. I probably won't send any more hair. I don't have a lot more to send anyway. But it's just kind of interesting that I do feel like I have really good intuition, or that things tend to just work out for me in general. And so the fact that this didn't happen, and then I get a letter saying you're lucky it didn't happen, it kind of fits with like the way I kind of navigate reality. It just seems like, yeah, maybe that's something not to mess with. Maybe I'm supposed to be deaf in my right ear and I should just leave well enough alone.
Well, invitations are definitely a part of it. Let me give you a quick anecdote on that. Like I was asking them, I wanted to see, this was, you know, when I was really getting into the contact thing, and you can really like lose yourself in it. But I was saying, I want to go see an NHI. I understand that they can take human form. Is there an NHI anywhere near me that I can go see? And they said, yes, it's in this specific area of the city. You can go find one. And they kind of told me what it was about and how to find it. And I said, okay, I'm going to go over there and take a look. And they said, whoa, 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 why are you doing that? I said, well, I want to see it. I'm just curious. And they said, that's dangerous. It's an invitation. And I said, well, you could protect me, right? And they said, we can't protect you if you invite it. And I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
And I didn't go, obviously, to go check it out. But then conversely, I said, well, what if I went to Skinwalker Ranch? And they said, oh, you can go there. We've got people there.
So hit us with what you think was maybe I mean, the coin flip thing is impressive. 3 times, 3 perfect calls. You know, if that's its thing, I could see that being the most epic thing that someone would experience doing this. But what's the most interesting thing you got insight wise? You never really got a name. You got these 4 types of watcher beings, but did you ever find out exactly what you were communicating with? Did it give you any other confirmations that really stick out to you?
Those were the confirmations that I thought were most physical or most reality based. The other ones that and again, I don't know that everything, I have to be discerning about what they tell me. So what they tell me, I have to run through a process of verifying too. And I always take it with a little grain of salt. But at the same time, nothing that they've said has conflicted with years of research that we've done. So it's made me think, are they reading my mind, or are they, is the research accurate? I don't know.
Yeah. So just before we close out this first hour, because we have a lot of other things to talk about, I just want to make sure we don't leave anything on the table regarding that. You say it kind of validates the research. What parts of the research does it validate? What are your conclusions that now at this new level of confirmation, you're like, yeah, I think I can definitively say this, this, and this?
Well, as far as the science is concerned, I'm willing to just let go of it and say it's quantum based. You know, this is all quantum interactions that we don't understand. We are part of a greater reality, and there's a greater reality all around us that involves these interactions and consciousness in ways that we just don't understand yet. And that's the science part of it that I'm most interested in now. It's not even the hard objects as much, but the consciousness aspects and what happens between particles. If people can determine what spooky action at a distance is, which was what Einstein would call it, when particles would transfer information faster than light in between them. You know, particle A shifts, and so particle B shifts because they have some communication between them that we don't understand. Those things are most interested to me on the science. Quantum superposition is another thing that I think is really important to the phenomenon. I would bring up like the Ariel School incident as a good example of a very well documented, well supported UFO incident that many people reported the same thing, but a couple people who were there, a couple of the kids, said that they only saw one being, for example, instead of two. So it's different. That is very common in UFO related incidents.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I saw in your comments section, there was a critic who said that the comments of the Grimoire analysis, they said that, you know, all the Grimoires you used are from Western systems, so you're getting a better analysis of the culture rather than the magic itself. But, you know, this is what we have, so you feed in what we got, and this is what happens. But he went on to say, the magic mostly happens via the total irrational subconscious. The grimoires are instructions for the rational mind to try and direct the irrational subconscious, which is a wild beast. To get the irrational mind to do the magic, there are a number of steps: discipline, repetition, emotions, fasting, and also conviction. And I just thought that was a really great, succinct framing of it all. And I think that's highly accurate. It's what a lot of the magic books try to say, but in a really succinct package.
Yeah, that was really convenient that I had a practitioner kind of pop in at the end of the research and offer some insights. I'm glad you saw that. I think that that's very valid criticism of that grimoire analysis, that it is all Western. And if you were to try the same methods, right, and that's what we tried to do by reducing it. And the beings told me also that I shouldn't do that so much. They said I'm all signal and no noise. I was trying to reduce it to say, okay, these are the steps you would have to take. You'd have to involve some sort of meditation ritual. You'd have to involve it. And if you transfer that into a different culture and match that up with, say, Buddhist teachings, it will still work. And this is really important point because, like, take possession, for example. That's something that has now been very well documented. It's even in the DSM for mental health conditions. And there's a number of practicing psychiatrists who have encountered supernatural stuff while they were doing this possession research. And so if you take possession as an example, it happens in Middle Eastern countries, and you would go see an imam, and the symptoms are the same, but the ritual to get it out is different, and the belief mechanism is different, and the entity that you're praying to is different. Same thing in Buddhist cultures or Far East cultures where they believe in different gods. It ends up being the same method to release them from possession. So it's independent of, say, the individual entity.
Yeah, it's super fascinating, and it kind of gets into why culture creation is such a big deal for intelligence networks, for these beings, for religions, because what you believe does seem to have some effect on reality. And what is our culture other than our collective beliefs and thoughts and preferences, all that stuff. And so if you can kind of start to steer that in certain directions, yeah, you can control a culture.
Yeah.
Well, man, this really has been awesome. I mean, we really started with a pretty impressive thing that you did with the secret cipher, running those names through and getting these crazy hits that it does seem like, at least in name, some of these characters, there's a code to the characters that are out in culture. And again, if the whole game is culture creation and steering it and managing belief systems, this has been done from the ground up. So
Right.
this is just a piece of evidence that suggests that, yeah, here's some anomalous evidence that can be added to the stack. But
Perfectly
yeah, I thought this was really great, man. What are you working on next before I let you go?
So we've been diving into some historical threads. There's something called the Schofield Bible, which we just did a whole series on. And that is what forms some of our beliefs today. So I'm really interested in what we believe, how it got there and, the system behind it. And then trying to give people a better understanding of the greater reality. And it involves UFOs, but it doesn't stop there.
Cool. Well, I appreciate your time. I'm glad we've now done 2 interviews here, and I saw the name of your show, Fortean Winds. I mean, that is a big bat signal to me that you're going to approach things from a multidisciplinary approach, and I think that's the best one to go with. So kudos on a great name for your podcast that led to us now doing this twice. I enjoy looking at high strangeness in all sorts of ways. So thanks for doing it. Keep up the good work and take care. Anything else to add? Your links?
Yeah, we're just everything's at forteanwinds.com. And we have a TikTok where you can see some pretty interesting stuff and a YouTube, also Fortean Winds. We respond there too.
Solid. Well, hopefully you get some more good feedback that is still remains cordial. All right, you animals.
I appreciate it, man.
Of course.
Thank you.
Take care, man. Have a good one. Hallelujah. There we have it. Another brick in the wall that is THC. RamX bringing a few fresh and new things to the table. Several, actually. We have kept in touch since that last interview a little bit, like he mentioned. And he would send me these things that he'd be working on. And it just started to feel like we had more than enough to give it another go. And I struggled with what to even name this episode. Hidden Codes of Reality Theater sounded pretty good. I guess I could still change it, but this is very synchromystic adjacent. We are finding patterns where there shouldn't be any in a chaotic random universe. And these do seem like the hidden codes of reality theater. Like, it kind of sums everything up quite nicely. And we did have a lot of visual reference in this one, and I tried to make sure that we were still explaining it all well for audio listeners, but it's probably a little hard to keep it all straight without that reference, though you can look in the show notes and click through some of the provided links of his to dive deeper, but this kind of data analysis in general seems to be his expertise, and to have all these hits on names of elite families and figures that are public facing when it comes to witnesses in the disclosure mix, that's really interesting. To me, especially with recent events, it just sticks out with this Charlie Kirk Snake Eyes thing. You start to wonder if people are brought into some of these secret networks and given new identities. Maybe they're given fake birthdays and these number codes just are stacked up in them in these fake identities to have some kind of effect, a potent effect. It's weird. Why do George Floyd and Charlie Kirk have the same birthday 20 years apart? And why did they serve basically the same purpose for people on both sides of the divide? Both killed which we all watched on camera and were affected by. And then the person is exalted with halos and angel wing artwork. And the other side says, oh, look at them, basically exalting a really terrible person. It's just like such a mirroring. And I can't believe they have the same birthday. That seems like another one of those clues to what is this reality and how is it coded? And is it something metaphysical, or is it really just controlled from down here? I almost can't believe the latter anymore. But a lot of the most powerful people on the planet have been known to have changed their names, including going from Bauer to Rothschild and Drumpf to Trump. I mean, I guess we can kind of include me in that too. Not that I'm anyone significant, but I did kind of change my name trying to build this show without it tracking back to my low-wage management job, and so I wouldn't get fired. And then when I kind of transcended that life, I did feel like I became someone new, and I just wanted to do it because I could, because I achieved a level of freedom in life that would allow me to have some fun with my own name and start a strange new branch on the family tree. I guess you'll have to decide if you hold that against me, but look, Carlson is such a generic name. I wanted to mess with it. There's not a lot of meaning in it to me, but either way, we know it's very common for actors to change their names as they go into a career, and maybe we should extend that knowledge to also include people outside of Hollywood, just actors on the world stage, so to speak. It's not unprecedented, basically, is what I'm saying. So if it's found in one area, when you start a career in Hollywood where you're actually trying to get attention, why couldn't it also be started when someone starts a military career, a political career, a scientific career? You know, can't you just backcast a lot of their information and make them whatever you want? It's a curious thing. But why would it all relate to UFOs? That's a very interesting question. If you consider UFOs to be a subset of phenomena that should be folded in under the occult umbrella, then you do start to see an overlap. And if your model for reality is something along the lines of the physical being derived from or a reflection of the spiritual realm, now we have even more coherence around a lot of this stuff. And powerful people probably have a much better model for reality that they keep private. And if you have an accurate, detailed framework of reality that is required for effectively manipulating it in your favor, you do have to first know it inside and out, which is why so many people fail to understand what magic is about, fail to acknowledge what the gurus say, the wise men say, which is don't get overly distracted with what's out there in the external world. You need to look inward and develop your inner world. I mean, so many people say that. So many people say that have been disappeared by the CIA. So many bits of data say that have been censored by the CIA. I think that they are almost comfortable with you thinking anything about conspiratorial events as long as you're still looking out there and not truly understanding what you are, which is David Icke's whole thing about a point of consciousness having a human experience. And they don't want us to think about metaphysical things at all. Either way, yes, I think that's how these things fit. If you have a better model for reality, you're not scratching your head on what all this stuff is quite as much as other people. And when trying to assess something like manifestation, like if your model's wrong, then of course you think it's bullshit and you think there's no way it could be possible. Yet there's plenty of data to the contrary. It's just funny how it works out. It starts with your map, as they say. So I thought this was helpful in developing that map. And I still probably haven't even thought through all the implications of what RamX has presented here. But it does seem highly significant, and I just appreciate his attempts to take a new approach, to zig when others zag. I hope you agree. Also, I'm not really big on the AI stuff, despite what it might seem like. I know I use the AI intros, and I have the screen behind me at the studio with all the fake higher side licensing brand deals. I don't know. I thought that was just a good use of the screen, but I'm working on something new, something not AI based that I did myself, and something far less distracting but appropriate. We'll see how it goes. But I have spent a lot of time trying to not let the intro video accompaniment be slop, and that is why I went with the black and white classic TV aesthetic, specifically trying to avoid a lot of the AI artifacts and weird shininess and smoothness that I think a lot of us are put off by, but whatever. That's not really what I'm talking about here. I really mean reading AI-generated material. I'm very much over that. The bullet points with the emojis and just the flowery language, I hate it. I think we all do. But I do like pattern recognition when it comes to stuff like UFO experiences and NDEs and all the weird categories we get into around here. So folding in a bunch of grimoires and analyzing for patterns and things that might be noticed when you compare their protocols and ritual steps and all that, it is a really good application of the tool, I would say. The Plus show adds a lot. If you're not a Plus member yet, you are missing half the show. Come on in and support the little podcast that could, keeping it all ad-free, independent, and unassuming, and also get twice as much show for your $8 to $12 attaboy. But in this one, after the first hour, we got into more fun stuff. Jake Barber's contact summoning event. We talked about synthetic beings and non-local consciousness, Nazi occultism and its legacy, grimoires, and the practices that are found in the various ones that he added to the data set. We talked about the agency of various exotic intelligences. The Nazca mummies, that's one where, Jesse Michaels seems to have maybe fallen into that trap of overhyping something and then having it be not all that exciting. And that hurts me because I do think he does a lot of great interviews. And as someone who's been following UFOs and disclosure for so long, I'm just sick of that pattern repeating. So who cares how many initial views you get if you generally disappoint people because you said it was going to be something different than what it was? Enough of that. But no shade at Jesse Michaels. Good attempt. But we talked about that situation a little bit and the Nazca mummies in general. We talked about some data he looked at where UFO sighting hotspots all seem to have strange underground features, or at least caverns and caves and all that. We talked about the Boogosphere thing, which he emailed me afterwards on that and said that he had lunch with a friend of his that actually went to Mexico to see the Boogosphere in person and actually talk to the researchers, and he said that it's the real deal. So this is someone RamX trusts and actually is dedicated enough to this stuff to go see it in person, and they gave a positive review thinking that it's genuine. So he's just passing along that info. We also talked about several other fun things. You know how it goes. Get in there, link in the show notes, and it's very easy to sign up. Plenty of great stuff in the archives as well. Buy a ticket and take the ride. And speaking of good stuff in the archive, let's talk about that last interview with Professor Zhang of Predictive History. Very well liked, as expected. The Plus people have spoken and given it a 4.8. Love to see it. That is the magic number around here. And there were days in the past here between then and now where it was a 4.9, and this show and wrap-up could have easily been recorded on one of those days. The show would have come out and the wrap-up recorded. But I've been dealing with a sick kid, actually two, and other stuff that's kind of made it hard to get a show out. But either way, I won't complain about a 4.8 And we already have a follow-up interview on the books for December. So let's see how that goes. Some people did voice skepticism as to why his channel is being served up to everyone. Probably the most common comment I saw was, hey, this guy is already in my algorithm. Great to see him on THC. And I don't think these days there are very many examples of completely organic and unplanned virality online. But anybody making content is trying to be seen. Maybe he pays for ads. I don't know. I just, maybe there's a bunch of reasons that are pretty mundane for why that could be. But it is a curious thing. Like, he was everywhere before I even did that interview. I mean, that's how I discovered him, basically. But I do think he comes from an interesting perspective that we don't hear very often. I think that's part of the secret sauce that has helped him so much. I did ask him a bit about how controversial is his work really when you're living in China and throwing shade at the West and capitalism. Like, from the CCP perspective, sure, let it rip, go for it. But, just factor that into your assessment and enjoy. I don't know that every single person is a complex puzzle to figure out, contrary to the interview I just did today. But I thought he had a lot of compelling and unexpected things to say about China and their elite and how their culture has been curated. So happy to have launched that one out into cyberspace and this one as well. RamX was certainly well liked before, came with fresh takes today, and had nice things to say about you guys. So that sounds like he's been set up for success to me. And let's close it out with a traditional look at the meetup calendar, highersidemeetups.com, a place where anyone can post and host local events. Just pick a fun local venue and pick a date far enough in the future that I can call it out on a couple of shows. And hopefully some other local listeners will join you for a good time. Low pressure, low risk, low cost, and a great way to expand your network in the ways that matter, in person and local. Here's what's on deck. All right, tomorrow, Friday, October 17th, we got the Rail Yard meetup in Elkin, North Carolina. And then October 27th, we have one in Berlin, Germany at the Volksbar. And then Friday, October 31st, Halloween, people are meeting up in Brenton Woods, New Hampshire at the Observatory Bar at the Mount Washington Hotel. I like it. And a couple already for November. November 5th, Oakland, California at Bar Chiru. And November 6th in Rancho Santa Margarita, California, the Laguna Beach Beer Company. And, the hits just keep coming. Oh, no. We got one November 7th in Tampa, Florida at Coppertail Brewing. I've been there, and I might have to attend. Busy November, if you can believe it, with 2 little kids and starting traditions and basically only having family here and all that. But November 7th, I'm going to try to be there. And then November 8th, Woodstock, Virginia at the Woodstock Brew House. And November 10th, you already know, Gail Brath's Ale House in Eden Terrace, Auckland, New Zealand. Lot of free press for Gail Brath's Ale House. I love it. It's another great thing. It's kind of like getting a little extra promo juice to a local venue that you like. Especially in this corporate-controlled reality, we all have to support and appreciate independent businesses, not just independent podcasts, but, the whole thing. All right, good stuff. Take advantage, put yourself out there, and use the digital to facilitate the real. Thanks for listening. I got to go be a dad. Take care of you and yours like I'm about to. I've done my part. Your move, reality code crafters, lifetime actors, and engineers of our esoterically fueled everything. Your fucking move.
I see your face in traffic, and you look so stuck. No sense of adventure, just a routine fuck. They can diagnose depression, but don't know why you're bored. Mystery comes knocking, but you don't answer the door. No, there are lights in the sky, not found on any map. Creatures deep in the forest that no ranger has tagged. There are things in the ocean you won't see from the land. Life's under no obligation to make sure you understand. Until the truth is out there, when you get past the lies, it comes when you least expect it, and it wears a disguise. It'll tell you everything just for a goof. Can't take any pictures, won't have any proof. So I watch you live like you never wanted it. A lost soul that's forgotten what really haunted is. You didn't ask, but just let me say, this is a horrible approach to seizing the day. There are things you can know that you can't even think. No doctor has medicine like the shaman's next drink. Sleep is never better than inside of the dream. Who promised you anything would be as it seems? I'm told the truth